introducing my colleague, Julian Goldstein, who will be introducing our guest speakers. Julian Goldstein currently is the Development Assistance for Business and Economic Development for BPIA. Julian is a prior BPIA board member and a founder of the Lean Development Society, a little seed through regenerative agriculture and profit startup. He's worked with the US Global Leadership Coalition and has experience as a frontline advocate for the DC statehood movement, serving the District of Columbia government within the Douglas Commonwealth statehood coalition. Previously, he served within the grassroots campaigns, local and national nonprofit, enlisted in the US Air Force Reserves, worked with several elected officials at the local and federal levels, in addition to providing project support at the US Institute of Peace. Lastly, Julian provided direct support for constituent services and case-specific research for senior member of the US Democratic leadership. Julian holds a Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from Howard University and is proud DC native. Julian, thank you for your service, and I'll let you.
Yes. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Violet. My name is Julian Goldstein. I'll start by introducing the guest speakers. And after each guest speaker, we'll have 10 minutes to share a presentation on their expertise in the field. The program will run 1 hour 30 minutes, 90 minutes total. So we ask the audience to start preparing questions and kindly placing them in the chat. And if we can't get to all questions in time, we'll be able to follow up with emails post conversation. For our final guest speaker or new addition, Mr. Paul Harrison. Unfortunately, Mr. Robert Gaverick was not able to attend due to last-minute obligation. Paul, thank you so much for accepting our invitation at this time. So first, we'll begin with Dr. Patrick Maluki, Chair of the Department of Diplomacy and International Studies with the University of Nairobi. Then we'll kick it over to Mr. C.D. Glenn, President of the PepsiCo Foundation and Global Head of Social Impacts with PepsiCo Inc. Then will be added by Queen Mother Nina Womack, Global Director of Humanitarian Services at the African Diaspora Union. And lastly, we'll hear remarks from Mr. Paul Harrison, Director of the Office of Agricultural Policy at the United States Department of State. Thank you. Violet?
I thank you so much, Juliana. We'll go ahead and start with C.D. Glenn as a speaker. You have 10 minutes each speaker. As my colleague Juliana stated, we have 10 minutes for each speaker, and I'll start with C.D. Glenn.
Is there a particular question, or should I just share my thoughts around what we focus on?
I would share your thoughts around it, and after all the speakers will then present our questions.
Okay, so just by way of general introduction, as was mentioned, I lead the PepsiCo Foundation. PepsiCo is, as you may think, Pepsi and think soda, also think bigger and broader than that. We're the US's largest food and beverage company, and we have some great brands that many of you will know and be familiar with, whether it's Pepsi, as you know, but also Gatorade, Lay's, Doritos, Gatorade, SodaStream. And when you think of those products, I want you to think about where they actually come from. So whether it's the water that's used for Pepsi or Mountain Dew or Gatorade, or whether it's the potatoes that go into Lay's or the corn that go into Doritos, this really puts us, or the realities of the oats that go into Quaker Oats, another brand that we own. This really puts us squarely in the food security space, because all of the products that we make come from natural resources, and they come from the land that is so valuable, particularly in Africa, particularly as it relates to agriculture. So we have a strong commitment to food security, and in three particular ways. So we're a food company, we're a beverage company, and we're a company that when we show up, we create opportunities through our supply chain and through our suppliers all around the world. And so my job as leading the foundation is to think about, yes, the great products that we put out into the world, but also to think about the impact of the communities where we live and where we work. And so that leads to issues such as food insecurity, that's thinking about issues such as lack of access to safe water, and thinking about issues such as economic inequality. Because again, as we create great food products, we have to think about food insecurity. As we create great beverage products, we have to think about lack of access to safe water. And as we create opportunities through our employment and our supply chain, we also think about those who are underserved and those who've been historically disadvantaged and without opportunity. We all know the phrase that talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. And so I get to lead the organization in our response to really making opportunities more accessible to many more people. And so the foundations of the foundation is really about providing equitable access to nutritious foods, to safe water, and to economic opportunities. And so that leads us to do a number of things around the world, but with particular geographies in mind. And Africa is one of those, is a continent where I personally have spent a lot of my career in the government and in the philanthropic sector and in the nonprofit sector. And so being at PepsiCo and leading our philanthropic efforts, Africa has been, since 2007, a place where PepsiCo as a company and the foundation has been investing and seeking to bring about greater solutions, particularly around food insecurity, lack of access to safe water, and economic opportunities writ large. And we have incredible track record of success, particularly in countries such as Egypt, Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. And just to give you a little bit of information on stats, in 2023 alone, we just announced our global impact report. And so globally in 2023 alone, we delivered more than 16 million meals to over 350,000 people. We reached over 450,000 female smallholder farmers and their communities, really helping them to develop and enhance their agricultural productivity. 10 million people with access to safe water, scholarships for underserved students around the world, and really support to small businesses, particularly in the food and beverage industry. And so we're really proud of the work that we're leading and doing as it relates to addressing food insecurity, providing clean drinking water, water conservation programs, distribution programs, and conservation programs, and then really thinking about economic opportunities, particularly job creation, employability, and small business support. So I can share more later around some of the countries and some of the key programs, but really grateful to BPIA for putting together this program. BPIA is an organization that I'm very familiar with for more than the past 20 years, even when I was an undergrad at Howard University. So really love that this program is taking place, the leadership under Alexandria, and just really grateful to be able to share some of what PepsiCo as a global food and beverage company is doing on the continent, and that it's doing to really do more and be a positive force for good and agent of change for people and the planet writ large, with a real focus around underserved communities. So with that, I'll pass it to the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and maybe start with Inene Ijambi. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with the Black professionals in international development. I think it's a great endeavor. My name is Inene Ijambi. I live and work in Nigeria in collaboration with partners globally. I'm an international development professional, and my expertise is at the intersection of applying those development methodologies to combat poverty, to eliminate hunger, to improve educational outcomes, stronger governance systems, along with methodologies from strategic communications. And I run my firm, Verbatim Virtual Solutions, and we provide technical assistance to clients such as the United Nations Global Compact, the World Bank, as well as many regional agencies in Africa. So my take on food security will focus very much on what's happening in Nigeria, the work that we are doing there, the current situation, what the challenge is. And I would like to look at the ways that development professionals, governments, the private sector, the media, and community groups and civil society can play in addressing this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Inene Ijembe. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Queen Mother Nina.
Okay, great. Greetings, everyone. My name is Queen Mother Nina Womack. I am a native of Los Angeles, California, a Pan-Africanist, a humanitarian, and I'm also an installed Queen of Development in Ghana, West Africa. I have been an advocate for African culture, for Africa for over 30 years. And so now my global development work has begun within the past couple years or so. At a local level here in Los Angeles, California, I, as a humanitarian, as a creative professional, I became very concerned about our food insecurity. So I took the initiative at a grassroots level to recover food from grocery stores, from farms here in Los Angeles, and redistribute it to the people to give underserved communities, food desert communities where I grew up in South LA, to make sure that they have access to healthy food from stores like Whole Foods, which is a large grocery chain specialized in organic foods. Also from Trader Joe's, which is another healthy food market chain. And so from doing that work with redistributing to underserved communities, my organization, Let's Be Whole, has fed as few as 100 people weekly to 5,000 people in one day. I work with politicians, with our California senators to provide good food, nutritious food to those in need here. So from doing that work, then I started to be concerned about food insecurity at a global level. And what can I do as a food justice activist, as a food sovereignty activist, to strengthen the hunger situations throughout the world? So I became the global director of humanitarian services for an organization called African Diaspora Union. It was founded in South Africa. We have chapters in Nigeria, throughout Africa. And that is my job, is to mobilize resources so we can feed make sure that people of African descent have access to healthy food. Also, that because I'm a social impact entrepreneur, I started a farm organization called One World Food Hub. And it's a startup that I recently started. It's basically a food hub to be able to provide marketing support for smallholder farmers, especially in Africa, to also find markets, global markets for African farmers. The research, everyone, has shown that the key to global food security is African agriculture. So we must invest in African agriculture. That is what I advocate. That is what I'm doing. I am mobilizing hundreds of thousands of African farmers across the continent. And I opened up One World Food Hub in Nigeria, in Uganda, in Ghana, and I'm on a roll to get us together so we can produce healthy food in Africa that can be distributed locally, regionally, the continent-wide through the AFCFTA, and then also globally to bring food here in America and Europe and so forth. So that's a little bit about me, and I will get into why global food security and the focus on African agriculture is so important to our sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Patrick Meluke.
Thank you very much. I want to share the screen because I want to give some academic perspective on this subject. If you allow me, I'll just take a very few minutes and then let me see this one, sorry. Screen share. I don't know, have I shared it? Not yet?
Not yet, we are not able to see it.
All right, just, why not? Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Now share, therefore. Is it there now?
Yes, we are able to.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Patrick Maluki. I teach at the University of Nairobi. I'm an academic, and my area is on peace and conflict studies, and I was requested to speak on this very important subject of food security, which is one of the outcome of conflict whenever we have them in society. I just want to make a few remarks based on my academic research. We all know that and agree that food security is a very critical issue that affects millions of people around the world. By the FAO definition, food security would refer to a situation where all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and lead active and healthy lives. I think this is a subject that most of my colleagues have alluded to, and therefore food security is a major concern. Of course, this situation is becoming worse with climate change, and the climate change is projected to have significant impact on global food systems. The global economy plays also a crucial role in shaping food security with international trade investments, influencing availability and affordability of food. This exactly now focuses my discussion. Climate change is expected to have significant impact on food systems. For instance, changes in temperatures, precipitation patterns, extreme weather events, rising temperatures are projected to reduce crop yields and change the distribution of crops, leading to changes in food availability and prices. Changes in precipitation patterns can also lead to droughts and floods, which can have devastating impact on crops yield and livestock productivity. So these are important topics actually in academic field. The global economy play a crucial role also in shaping food security. International trade and investment can influence availability and affordability of food by promoting trade agreements that prioritize profit over people. If that happens, then we have food shortages. The increasing use of biofuels is also of concern. It can divert land
I seems to be having some difficulty with Dr. Meluke. Dr. Meluke, are you able to hear us? Okay. Okay, so it looks like we're having some difficulty with Dr. Meluke, but once he's signed back in, we'll be able to let him finish his presentation. In the meantime, we'll move on to Paul Harrison.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone today. My name is Paul Harrison. I'm a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Department of State, and I currently serve as the Director of the Office of Agricultural Policy here in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. So we have two primary objectives in our office. We are promoting U.S. agricultural exports and ensuring U.S. national security. Those are very broad objectives. The way we do that, we've got three teams working here in the office. One is biotechnology, because biotech adaptations are important for being able to feed the world as we move forward. As we have another billion people in the world by 2050, we need a lot of innovation. Help plants take up nutrients better, help them utilize water better, things like that, where you can do a lot of innovation with biotech. We have a U.S. Ag Export team, which works closely with U.S. Department of Agriculture. We provide food assistance, obviously, as the United States, but actually World Trade does moves a lot more food in terms of volume, and so that's important to get that up. Oh, he's back. Doctor, would you like to go ahead and continue?
Yes.
Please.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Power just tripped, and then I have just to join using my phone because I really wanted to make my point. So pardon me for that. So I'm just trying to point out what is happening in Africa. And I'm stating that in 2050, 50% of African crop yield will be affected by climate change. The causes, as we have seen, includes extreme weather events like drought, floods, temperatures, changing precipitation. And this could lead to reduction in food availability in countries that are struggling with the food insecurity at the moment. What my point is that food security is very important, but it has this, it is very vulnerable to climate change, and there's need for society to really invest in climate change. Then I want us to observe that majorly there are some communities that are vulnerable, women, the youth, who may not have the means to move to different places, who may be tied by responsibilities. They will be more impacted on by food insecurity. And therefore, as we make policy, we engage in development, it's very important that we are aware and alert of the impact of food insecurity, especially on these vulnerable populations, especially the youth, and including fiscally challenged people in our society. So although the society will suffer from food insecurity, but this will have different different impact on different segments of the population. So when we approach food security issues, we must be aware of the segmented populations in our society, so that each population type, or rather category, is addressed accordingly, so that we basically ensure that all have sufficient and nutritious food for living healthy lives. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry for tripping off.
Thanks, Doctor. I'll just go ahead and pick up where I was. As stated, run the Office of Agricultural Policy in the Department of State. We've got three teams. The biotech team, that's about the innovation necessary to help feed the world and help crops adapt to climate change. U.S. An ag export team working on getting exports into global markets and ensuring those markets are transparent and functioning, so that food can get where it needs to go. And then we have a food security team that works closely with USAID and a lot of international partners, like FAO and others, to ensure that we are meeting assistance needs around the world when they arise, and also in the longer term. Secretary Blinken makes fighting food insecurity one of his top priorities. We've been working closely with our colleagues at USAID and the U.S. Department of Agriculture on a daily basis to ensure that food security is there for all the populations of the world. We work to address each of these dimensions, or each of the dimensions of food security, let me say. So availability, accessibility, utilization, and stability. So food needs to be available through either trade or local production. food needs to be accessible. That means that all people have an adequate ability to obtain food, and then food must be utilized effectively. It needs to be safe and nutritious. And so the food supply must be stable. It means all three of the aforementioned dimensions are consistent over time. Now, unfortunately, of course, the world is facing a number of food security crises, some specific to an individual country, others more regional in nature. But we're at a place where, after the COVID-19 pandemic, with a number of global conflicts that have exacerbated vulnerability of populations, we're in a position where currently, and this is our most current data, somewhere around 700 million people around the world don't really know where their next meal is going to come from. So as I mentioned, I'm a Foreign Service Officer with U.S. Department of State, right? My last overseas posting was in Madagascar, and Madagascar is an example of a country that really does suffer from food insecurity. 22, 23, 24 million people, no one's exactly sure, in that country, but about 90% of the people who are in Madagascar live on $1.50 a day or less. They're very food insecure, and you see the impacts of malnutrition on the population, whether it's in the north of the country or the south of the country, and there's always some kind of climate impact as well. When I worked in Madagascar, we did a drought declaration in the south of the country on Tuesday. We did a hurricane or a typhoon declaration in the north of the country on Thursday. Right, those kind of impacts, and of course Madagascar is a big country, but you can really see the climate impacts there very drastically. Let me pull back for a minute and talk about some of the global conflicts. Right, so there are conflicts in individual countries, of course, that lead to insecurity and often are driven by food insecurity. Of course, Russia's war in Ukraine put a lot of people at risk. I think United Nations says around 23 million people across the world faced hunger because Ukraine was such an exporter. And so we've worked very hard to ensure that Ukraine gets back into global markets and doing what we can to help out there, because that's so important to ensuring global food security. I think, though, perhaps the most pressing issue facing food systems today is the threat posed by climate change. Prolonged droughts, increasingly erratic weather patterns make it difficult for farmers to plant and harvest. Of course, El Nino, La Nina, we've seen the impacts of those here recently, and how that has upended some harvest. Even though at the moment we've had some record harvest in Russia, good harvest in the U.S., good harvest in a few other places like Brazil, so kind of in globally a good spot in terms of numbers, but someone mentioned transportation. Transportation is always a real challenge, right? Getting the food where it needs to go. So agriculture and of course supply chains are constantly at risk of disruption. With global population growing, another billion people in the world by 2050, the demand is for food is going to increase, and of course. In a lot of countries, middle class numbers are growing exponentially, and so that means that the demand for protein is increasing, which of course means more stress on food production, because people are demanding getting more of their calories from protein as opposed to more easy to produce grains. Right. Let me talk a little bit about the economic impacts of food security. So food security is national security, right? In the United States, we produce enough food to feed, on an annual basis, to feed 1 billion people. We have about 350 million people in the United States. So we have a lot of food to export, but that's not the case everywhere in the world. And when countries don't have enough to feed themselves, then they become insecure. Instability increases. That causes a lot of issues. And those issues never stay within the country, right? They always move across borders, right? Problems don't respect borders, problems move. And so you get migration, you get conflict breaking out across borders. And so we recognize that it's not just our food security, but it's global food security that is our national security interest, right? So we want to ensure that people around the world can feed themselves, that they have access to trade, to food through trade, because stability is what folks need. So they need food security to have stability and take those first steps towards achieving long-term economic growth. And the food security is the first step in that. So if people know that food's available, accessible, and nutritious, they can break the negative feedback loop and turn it into a positive one. They can grow their economy. So how do we ensure that everyone in the world is food secure? There are a couple of ways that we make this happen. The first is emergency assistance. So when there's a crisis, we react to that. Since 2021, we've provided about $20 billion to fight global food insecurity. Places like Gaza, the Horn of Africa, Ukraine, all around the world. We've worked to provide this assistance. We provide about 1/3 of the United Nations World Food Program's annual budget. Of course, emergency assistance is only kind of a short-term fix. It's not a long-term solution. And so we are investing in programs that will bring a longer-term solution. We help invest in infrastructure, especially in developing economies, to get food from fields to markets. We invest in biotechnology because we need to increase the nutritional value of certain crops, make them more resilient to climate change. We advocate for trade policies that don't limit the flow of food and fertilizers through unnecessary export restrictions. And we also advocate a lot for diversity inclusion, for recognition of roles that often underrepresented groups play, like women in agriculture. So one of the things we've been working on recently is a United Nations declaration for 2026 is the International Year of the Woman Farmer, because we really want folks to focus and think about the impactful role that women play in agriculture, not just in growing crops, but in getting crops to market, from the fields to the market, selling the crops, producing products that go into grocery store shelves, right? Moving food all around the world. It's important to recognize that, because I think, when you look at the statistics, women are over half of the people who work in agriculture globally. We are out there promoting long-term climate-smart agricultural practices as well. That's what's necessary if we're going to combat climate change and feed the world in the future. We're investing in new technologies, new tools. Like I said, biotechnology is extremely important, right? We can't pour more fertilizer, more pesticides, more herbicides onto fields, right? That's not a long-term solution. It's not sustainable. What we need to do is find ways to help the plants produce more with fewer inputs, help farmers produce more with fewer inputs so they can lower their costs. We have an idea for something called digital agriculture, right? Which is how you use technology to help farmers farm better. So you help gather information, you process that information, you share it back down to the farmers so they can recognize, oh, in this half of my farm, I need to use more water, but in this part, I need to use a different kind of fertilizer. Maybe over here, this soil would grow a better crop, those kind of things. That's what digital agriculture is very roughly. It's about using information to let farmers farm better. And I know farmers want to farm better. So I grew up on what you would call a hobby farm in Southern Illinois, in the United States, but my grandfather farmed commercially. He would do everything he did the year before until he realized that he could do something better, more efficiently, cheaper, right? Get a better result. That's what farmers do, right? They innovate when they see an opportunity to innovate. And so we try to help farmers with that. That's kind of what digital agriculture is. Let me talk just real quickly about a couple of programs that we've got. One is Feed the Future, which is led by our colleagues at the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. Feed the Future is our flagship global hunger and food security initiative. We work with 20 countries, most of them in Africa, to help farmers innovate, help them get hands-on training, things that will help them adapt to climate change and be able to farm better and more productively. A second initiative that we have that we launched recently with the Department of State is the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils. It's focused initially on Africa, but it's expanding to other parts of the world like Latin America. It is exactly what it says it is. It's about how you adapt crops to climate change. So which crops will provide the most nutritional benefit to people in Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world. How can we adapt those crops to climate change? So these aren't crops that have been invested in. It's not coffee, it's not chocolate, cacao, it's not cotton, it's not corn, it's not wheat, it's not rice. It's things like cowpea, right, that provide a high nutritional benefit and need some investment to be able to adapt to climate change. So how do we identify those crops and invest in them, and then get farmers to grow them so they can provide greater nutritional value in local markets? And then, of course, the soils element of that. How do we get farmers the means to help them rebuild their soil health? Of course, Africa has a problem with degraded soils. And so how do we help, not with fertilizers, right? Because fertilizer is expensive. It's bulk product. It's hard to transport, right? It's hard to get often to farmers when and where they need it. But how do we help them rebuild their soils in a more natural way, in a more localized way that's going to let them be more productive? So that's what the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils is about. We've got about $150 million in that effort, which is a relatively new initiative from the Department of State in the past year, and that's led by Dr. Carrie Fowler. So let me close there, and I look forward to our additional discussion. Just those are a few of the things that we're doing and how we're trying to bring about change and ensure food security around the world. Particular focus in Africa for us, trying to take a holistic approach: the soils, the crops, getting people the skills they need, and how you make it all more inclusive so that everyone kind of has a seat at the table and is involved in the agricultural value chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we will be pivoting to our Q&A portion. So our first question, and each speaker will have an opportunity to answer. As we convene and leave here today, how do you envision the future of the global world, and what is your call to action to the audience in ensuring that the issue of food security can be well resolved, and marginalized groups such as women and children are able to take advantage of opportunities and growth? This will be first directed towards Ine and Jimby.
Thank you very much. So part of what we do using the methodologies of international development, and it's great to see Paul Harrison talk about the Feed the Future program. One of the clients my firm has served in Nigeria is we look at different methodologies that have worked. I'll take one from Feed the Future, which is the Making Markets Work for the Poor methodology to facilitate broad-based economic growth, specifically focused on working on rural communities who are, for the most part, the demographic in Africa, especially in Nigeria, who do a lot of our agricultural production. So as opposed to the United States, where a lot of the agricultural production is done through mechanized farming on big commercial farms, in Nigeria, we are generally fed and sustained by rural farmers. I'll give you a little bit of background about Nigeria, because I don't assume everybody understands what we're about. So Nigeria is Africa's largest country in terms of population, over 200 million people. It's a middle-income country. However, after having sustained economic growth over about a 10-year period, from about 2015, we've experienced a lot of shocks. So some bad governance models that were taking protectionism in terms of exports, as well as the economic shocks from the global crisis, the war in Ukraine, as well as COVID-19. But I mean, we flatlined. Nigeria is in a recession, and we're trying to dig ourselves out of that hole. Last year, the president declared a state of emergency in terms of food security in Nigeria. The work that I've done and driven that I believe in, and I think it's a way out for Nigeria, is working at the grassroots level. So we looked at where there is poverty. Mostly in Nigeria, there's poverty in the rural areas. What's their predominant occupation? It's subsistence farming to smallholder farming. So how can we get those farmers to be better equipped? And so what we did is that we worked with them on production through a UK government-funded program called GEMS 4. So we help them in terms of agricultural extension, where they have the knowledge to innovate and improve their yield. Yield is very low for a lot of farmers in Nigeria. So working on yield through good agricultural practices and extension work. Nigeria had a very robust agricultural extension system that was facilitated through the public sector, the government. My father happens to be a professor of agricultural economics and extension, studied at Iowa State University back in the 80s. However, this whole model was kind of thrown away. There was underinvestment in the space. And of course, what happens in such situations is people find other means of work. For Nigeria, we started investing in our oil, our crude oil production, and looked away from our agricultural production. And if you look at where we have, it's been a steady decline from the 70s to where we are today. So through GEMS 4, we tried to go back and look at all the latent capability in the space. So we worked with extension workers We found out what their issues were. There were knowledge gaps, a lot of logistical issues in terms of getting to hard to reach places in the rural areas to make sure that they can frequently build their capacity to improve their yield and production. We also worked with the agricultural input companies to look at how they can get better fertilizer, how they can get better seeds that have better yield, and all of that side of things. So we looked at the whole value chain, right? We also looked at the research institutions and what kind of support they need to disseminate information that will get to the grassroots. We looked at why a lot of farmers lose a lot, and part of it is the fact that we have very poor processing as well as very poor supply chains to get food. So a lot of these rural areas are hard to reach. And so access to markets is a problem. If you think about the horticulture value chain, and I mean, every single agricultural product is perishable. There's up to 40% post-harvest losses in Nigeria, and farmers and aggregators bear the brunt of that. So we did a lot of work at that end. But to create systemic change, you don't just work with farmers, right? You don't just work with the agricultural side of things, you have to work with the policymakers. And so, you know, we kind of collaborated with other development partners, such as the Food and Agricultural Organization, working with organizations like UNICEF and other people who have mandates to work in that space, so that the policymaking, the planning, the investment in executing programs is there. And also that side of evaluating and monitoring and making sure that we improve in terms of delivery. So that's a lot of the work that we did. Unfortunately, this, like I said, Nigeria has experienced a lot of shocks in the last few years. As of this year, right now, where we are is called the lean season from May to September. So this is when you've planted, but you haven't harvested. And so it's the time when a lot of hunger occurs, and part of the projections that they've done, there's this tool that is used called Cater Harmonize, that is used to measure and anticipate actually ahead of time if there are going to be food insecurity issues. And what we found is that in Nigeria, more than 26.5 million people are at risk of food insecurity. It's not as bad as getting to a famine. However, these are people who are going to go days without having nutritious food just because they're waiting until the next harvest. And so this protocol is used not just in Nigeria, but across the Sahel and the whole of West Africa. And if you look at the map, you can see that more than 50% of the Sahel and West Africa are in a similar situation. And so there's a lot of investment in that. Development partners are coming together. The United Nations, as well as the Nigerian government and some other agencies, are coming together to look for how to raise $320 million into a program to deal with this shock, and hopefully plan ahead and invest in what needs to be done to address issues such as rain, drought, pests, as well as security. So in Nigeria and a lot of the Sahel region, a big part of it is not only the shocks from climate change, it's also the fact that people are displaced and cannot have access to the farms because of banditry, terrorism, and other issues of physical security. So those are the things that I think need to be done. Government needs to track tools and reports early, make investments ahead of time, work with development partners, monitor and evaluate, as well as pour investments from other spaces. So for example, the Nigerian government stopped giving out a subsidy to oil importers. So while Nigeria produces crude oil, we import the petroleum products, which is a whole discussion about our economic space that needs to be addressed. However, those funds taken away from the crude oil subsidies can be plowed back into areas like agriculture. Nigeria is very fertile. A lot of our land is arable and can be cultivated if we had investments in our security infrastructure and capacity and the political will. I believe that we could feed a lot of the region and eventually reach global importers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Inene Ijambe. This question, the next question will be for CD Glenn. No, in reference to policies, in your technique of collaborating with industry peers, locals and international organizations, just to mention a few, what challenges do you face and what are the operational policies in place to combat such challenges?
Thank you. It's a great question, and I appreciate all of the comments and the insights provided by the other panelists. It's really a rich discussion and dialogue. So when we think about challenges, you know, as a private sector actor, we often think about challenges, but we also have to find a way. And so we think clearly about solutions. And I think, you know, from a real basic level, there's a lot of energy even around this conversation with grassroots organizations, with different stakeholders, with the US government, with the private sector. So I think the one challenge and the opportunity we all face now is sort of really how to come together, how to really look at economies of scale with a lot of our initiatives and endeavors. And so we ultimately all want to make meaningful impact in the communities where we're living, where we're working, where we're serving. And I would say now more than ever, you know, every organization must be, you know, sort of purposeful in the positive impact it wants to make and to have in order to operate not only for today or another quarter, but for years to come. And so, you know, we take the approach as a business of thinking about these issues in three ways. We think about overcoming challenges by being local, really bringing local solutions to local challenges, being proximate and supporting local nonprofits who are proximate to the issues and challenges that communities are facing. We think about it being lasting. If we really think about the different industries, whether it's the civil society and the nonprofit sector, the government and the public sector, or the private sector has a unique vantage point in terms of being lasting, if you will, because nonprofits, you know, operate, and I've worked in the nonprofit industry, and I worked in government, and now I'm in the private sector. But the nonprofit industry is dictated by, you know, programs and the longevity of those programs by the donors and the supporters that they have. And so some of the sort of quote unquote challenges are just whether the short-termism of how the funding flows from the donors. And so the programs and projects often last as long as the funding from the funder lasts. And so that could be an indelible challenge to really, yes, they're local, but the challenge of being lasting sometimes in the nonprofit sector is dictated and precipitated by the mentality of those providing the funding. If I think about government, the challenge that government has in terms of being lasting, government can be local, but being lasting is that it often operates in sort of election cycles. So one, you know, president to presidential or executive agency initiatives year on year. And we are in the U.S. government in a really, I think, a really great time and space where throughout different administrations, we have seen programs, whether it's PEPFAR, whether it's Feed the Future. We've seen programs last from administration to administration, but that's not necessarily guaranteed. And so the government has inherent challenges with being lasting because they last as long as those in power sort of want to carry on those various initiatives, and that's very subjective. The difference into being lasting with the private sector is that when the private sector sort of shows up for communities and thinks about issues such as food insecurity or lack of access to safe water or spurring economic opportunity, the private sector isn't trying to go anywhere. They're trying to be in these countries and the communities for years and years to come. And so they want to create a lasting, indelible environment and ecosystem where the local solutions can be lasting because business is not necessarily trying to go away, if you will. Business is trying to be in those communities for years and years and years. And so at PepsiCo, we think about being local. We know we can be lasting because we want to, you know, last for decades and for years to come. We also think about being leading, and so bringing catalytic efforts and initiatives to the community so that they can be a catalyst to bringing in whether it's the government or bringing in the local communities or having the local communities lead these initiatives. And so being local, lasting, and leading is how we overcome a lot of the challenges that would come about with different programs. So it's important to stay committed to the needs of the communities, not just for the short-term projects, but by becoming a long-term partner with local organizations working at the local level, really to bring about systemic change. The other thing I'll say, sort of from a business perspective, is that as businesses go, we're beyond doing no harm. And so you think about the private sector and the private sector role in development. We often talk about doing no harm. Nowadays, we're embracing the mindset of doing the most good for the most people, really in a shared impact, a shared value perspective, and that collective impact with the community, with the government entities and the private sector. And we think by bringing all the assets that we have. And when people think about the private sector, the first thing that we think about typically in terms of corporate assets are the profits, the money that we can provide. But often the private sector brings much more than our profits. We bring our people. In a country such as South Africa, I can tell you we have over 15,000 employees who work in the factories and in the distribution centers and in the places that we operate throughout the country of South Africa. And so bringing our people who work for the companies and bringing community members along gives us the ability to bring the whole corporation to an issue. So our profits, yes, but our people, and then obviously our products. And as a food and beverage company, we bring a number of products to and our supply chain and our processes that really can help address societal needs of a community. So really being able to bring all of the assets that we have, our profits, our people, our products, to solutions, to the needs of the community, focusing on local ownership. That's what we feel like will help catalyze long-lasting change, societal impact, and business opportunities for community members. Now more than ever, business has the opportunity to really be somewhat of a trusted voice in communities and partnering with local communities, again, because of that long-term, sustainable, indelible relationship we want to have to communities. So when we focus on bringing the totality of what we offer, again, our products, our people, our logistics, our supply chain, our processes into communities, we continue to build trust. And so that's where it's really important that we come not to do things for communities, but with and through communities where there's community and local ownership of these endeavors. And I've seen, this transformation firsthand. At PepsiCo, we have a global commitment to what we call an end-to-end transformation, where we put sustainability and human capital at the center of how we're going to create value. Our goal is to really drive growth for the company, but also growth for the communities. Business can't thrive unless communities are thriving. And if those communities are food insecure, if they're suffering from issues of malnutrition, if they're suffering from issues of non-productive agriculture, that doesn't help the community thrive, and therefore business can't actually thrive either. And so thinking about that three-pronged approach of being local, being lasting, and being leading is how we overcome challenges, how we work on greater collaboration between the private sector and the communities that we're there to serve. And I've seen this work, firsthand in different programs, whether it's smallholder focused programs in Egypt with female smallholder farmers, similar programs in Uganda, transformational programs in South Africa, early stage programs in Nigeria. And so it's really about really thinking about the approach to development, bringing all of the capabilities that we have, whether the private sector, whether the nonprofit sector, or whether the public sector. That's how we're going to really overcome a lot of the challenges and really bring about greater good for the communities where we live and work. And we're going to be able to address a number of the challenges around global food insecurity really by coming together, bringing all of the assets together. For too long in development, from my time as a Peace Corps volunteer or working in the Obama administration or working for the Rockefeller Foundation, and now with PepsiCo, I've seen a lot of isolated excellence, a lot of islands of excellence where individually we have great endeavors, but when we come together and when we put communities on the front line and focus on those communities, that's when I've really seen transformational change. So I'm really excited about programs such as this that does bring different voices to the issues, whether it's academia, whether it's the US government, whether it's the private sector, whether it's local nonprofit organizations, really trying to drive change. When we all come together, again, in this local fashion, in this leading fashion, we can really bring about lasting change. So I'm excited about what's to come. There's some, obviously some real challenges and headwinds that are facing us, but I think we're on a good track to really think about doing more together and really being stronger together to really look at growth and development and addressing issues like food insecurity in Africa.
Outstanding, and appreciate the bison spirit and
Oh,
collaborative
HU,
effort.
baby, HU all day.
You know. Our next question comes from the chat, and this is for Mr. Harrison. How can those organizations presently engage and work to address food insecurity in Africa work with Feed the Future? Please highlight any special or specific priorities on your side to engage organizations on the ground and globally.
Sure. So of course, Feed the Future is led by our colleagues at USAID, who would best speak on the logistics of how to engage with them, which we're always glad to make that connection for folks. But in general, we're always seeking innovative projects, innovative partners around the world. So Feed the Future targeted in 20 countries, most of them in Africa. And USAID does outreach there to make folks aware in each country of what they're trying to do and also what they're trying to do regionally. So that's really kind of the best route is engagement. Every USAID mission has a country director, has a team of folks working, large ones, smaller ones. But around the world, they are the ones who are functioning and putting together the Feed the Future programs. For the United States writ large, we engage with a whole host of people, of non-governmental organizations, of broader international organizations, to boost food security. So my office, for example, we work closely with the World Food Prize, which of course is the organization based in Des Moines, Iowa, that was founded by Norman Borlaug, who was the father of the Green Revolution back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so they are dedicated to food security around the world. And we work closely with them on things like youth education, right? Bringing students in to get them exposed to agriculture and innovative agriculture, right? We're always looking for innovations. We're always looking to help farmers, but not just farmers, right? We want to help farmers farm better, but we also want to help aggregators aggregate better. We want to help manufacturers, companies that make, biscuits, cookies, that pasta. We want to help them learn how to do things better as well and innovate and get their products distributed. So we also want to help the distribution networks be innovative. So we're always looking for these kind of opportunities. We feel like one of the things that we find to be extremely helpful in giving farmers tools and helping farmers innovate, and it's connectivity, it's information, right? When we did this in Madagascar, right, it was about getting cell phones in the hands of farmers. It wasn't about a 5G network or even a 4G network, right? It was about a little flip phone or whatever they wanted to use, but it was that connectivity. So it was about getting electricity to them so that they could recharge the phones, and then getting them that connectivity so that then the farmers knew how much their vanilla was worth. The farmers knew how much their rice was worth, because to be honest, sometimes the aggregators show up and they're offering the best deal for the aggregator. They're not offering the best deal for the farmer, and it's a one-sided transaction because the farmer doesn't know, right? The farmer doesn't know what the current price is for rice in the capital, right? Or in the market where it's going, or on the world stage where it's going to get exported to. But when the farmer does know that, then the farmer drives a better deal for himself or herself, gets more of the proceeds and the more value out of their hard work, and then they're able to use that to reinvest in their production, to invest in innovation, to become better, to boost their own nutritional uptake and that of their family, right? So that is something that we try to always do that's extremely important. It's that connectivity, because knowledge is power, right? When they have that connectivity and they have that access to knowledge, they can do better. And that's one of the things that we find. You don't inherently think about it when you think about agriculture, right? But most farmers aren't just farming for themselves, they're farming to sell, right? And so how do they get the information that's going to help them drive a better bargain and get more out of their more out of what they're putting into the ground, right? So I hope that's helpful. And like I said, in regards to USAID programs specifically, we're always glad to connect people with USAID. But usually the country directors in the individual countries in those 20 Feed the Future countries who are the best means of innovators finding their way into the Feed the Future program, and a lot of the other programs that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question is for Queen Mother Nina. One of the question is how best, based on your background, how best do you ensure that there is equal allocation and accessibility of food to all communities?
Thank you, Violet, for that question. Well, I think there are some practical steps that we can take, especially at a grassroots level. So I'm talking as a community, a local community-based organization, and then also a global NGO from that perspective. But it's figuring out ways how to reallocate the resources. For example, here in California, we have a policy. We have a law, which is the SB 1383, which is a policy to reduce food waste, for climate change, to help, make an impact on greenhouse gas emissions, as well as to help solve hunger. So there is a mandate by law in California and in about 8 other states that food producers, so your restaurants, your grocery stores, your farm organizations, they can no longer just throw out food. Here in the US, 40% of the food that is produced goes into the landfill. And when I found out that statistic, I was like, I've got to do something. I just can't let people starve and then good food just go into the landfill. So that's why I initiated recovering the food and properly distributing it in food deserts. I've been very strategic on what areas in Los Angeles need access to this healthy food. And I have a team of volunteers I work with. We go pick up the food and we give it to the people. I would like to see this same policy done in Africa and throughout the world. And that is why I'm the global director of humanitarian services for AfriDo. My vision is to be able to reach out to governments across Africa and wherever these food insecurities are, to urge them to create these similar policies. When I was every year when I go to Ghana and I go to Nigeria, I would drive, let me talk about Ghana. I would drive down acres and acres and acres of food being wasted on the ground, watermelons being wasted because the people don't have the proper manufacturing and processing facilities. They don't have the proper markets to get rid of the food waste. And I'm just like, why? I'm an activist. I'm sorry. I'm so passionate about this. I'm like, oh my God, why are watermelons rotting? Can't we just take them and give them to someone? So I would love to be able to have this be a policy, a global policy, that nobody can just waste food like that. Why is Sudan having hunger issues when there's food waste throughout Africa? So if we can, at a governmental level, create policies that we have like SB 1383 to properly redistribute the food, then that would make a great impact on food insecurity around the world. Also, again, investment in agriculture. 60% of arable land, of undeveloped arable land, is in Africa. I'm in conversations right now with Prosper Africa to let them know about this project that we're working on to aggregate African farmers to produce more food. So we need to mobilize investors. We need to mobilize grants and so forth to be able to put up manufacturing facilities in Africa, processing facilities, so that food can be properly distributed to everyone in Africa and redistributed globally to a global market. So I think just some simple steps like that. The step one, let's identify where the food is being wasted right now, today, right this second. Let's identify, let NGOs, like my organizations, let NGOs go pick up the food and give it to people. It's as simple as that, Violet, as simple as that.
Wonderful response. We appreciate the call to action. Next question is for Dr. Maluki. what role can academia play as a knowledge filter between NGOs, public agencies, and the private sector?
Thank you very much for this. Maybe before I go to the direct of the question, I want to make a few comments because following what I've heard from my colleagues, one of the challenges of food security in Africa has to do with structural problems. Ideally, a majority of African societies are modernizing, and therefore there is rural-urban migration. And unfortunately, the education system in the main African countries does not prioritize agriculture. And therefore, anyone who gets education ideally moves to town for white-collar job, and therefore leaving the rural population semi-illiterate. So there's no trickle-down effect with regard to educational awareness and creativity. So now, when these educated elites, if I may use that word, go to town, they need to eat. Unfortunately, the rural areas, which are majorly the producing areas, are not actually capacitated. Similarly, you find that most of the infrastructure development in terms of electricity, water connectivity, tarmac, good roads, and the cities. But food production is centered in the village, and the villages are completely without any infrastructure. And I want to echo what Queen Mother Nina has said about food wastage, because there are some areas, especially in Kenya, where we have a lot of food production, but it doesn't access markets. And therefore, this discourages the farmers. You produce, potatoes, oranges, or even food, but you don't have avenue to sell it. So in Africa, you find that there are some areas with suffering because of lack of accessibility to the market, but there are other areas where people are suffering because they have no source of food, and therefore you cannot transport excess food from one region to another region. And that already contributes to national food insecurity. Similarly, there is also the problem of lifestyle change, whereby majority of Africans are not consuming what they produce in their localities. You find that a particular area is suited for growth of millet or sorghum, but the local community does not want that, because when children go to school, they want to deal with the processed food. That's what they prefer, and therefore you find that there's mismatch between what is produced, what is possible to produce in an area, and what people want. And this brings the question of value chain addition, that there is very little value chain addition, and therefore most of the traditional foods which are climate resilient are not finding consumers. They are not needed, and that mismatch is very also a major challenge of food security in Africa. And then we have the incessant insecurity. It's really a pathetic, very, very serious problem, because there are quite a number of instabilities, community violence, wars, and you talk of South Sudan, talk of Sudan, you talk of Somalia, so the insecurity aspect really has impacted negatively on food security, because communities need to have security, peace to settle, to grow. It takes like 2 to 3 months to have crops to yield. But in most of the societies, they are fighting from day to day. They are ever running from here, cattle wrestling, etc. So in Kenya, we have the Kapedo area, the northern side of the country. Really, people are not stable, and therefore that insecurity does not give them ability to produce food, even for their own consumption. So quite a number of structural impediment. And then lastly, which is a major impact on food security, is climate change. Climate is really becoming a big problem to food security. Like now, Kenya has just gone through a very intense rainfall. I'm sure quite a number of you have seen the floods, even the series in rural. And this has completely swept food crops, from the farmers. And the farmers do not have the means to mitigate these changed environment. So there is multiple, causes of food insecurity, which really needs a concerted effort from NGOs, government, as well as development partners to deal with this kind of a problem. Yes.
Excellent. And then just a brief follow-up is how can communities locally conserve food and apply common methodologies, for example, food storage, and to innovate these practices?
Yeah, thank you, Steph, so much for that. Yes, yes. Communities have the potential, I would say the potential to conserve food and actually enhance food security. The problem is that most communities do not have the knowledge. Quite a number of African communities really depend on the traditional methods of food production, which has been wasteful, and therefore without modernization of agriculture, major modernization where there is community mobilization and infusion of technology to the rural communities through civil society activities, development partners, which can really train, the local communities on food conservation, production, and preservation. So the potential is there, but the community require external support where maybe they can learn methods, modern methods of food security. They can have issues of value addition, so that the main course they produce, they don't just use them as fruits, but they can produce juices, mega of flakes or other kind of value added products that are durable and they can be stored for a long time. So I think there is possibility of cooperative societies. If communities can be organized in cooperatives where they can be targeted for technology or other training, these are potential possibilities where they can really learn food conservation and preservation methods, which can prolong, or rather which can enhance their food security. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will be for CD Glenn from the chat. In Africa contents where corruption is rampant, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. How can governments create an enabling environment for private sector involvement in food security interventions while ensuring accountability and transparency?
It's a great question. I mean, how do you operate in non-permissive environments as it relates to government? I think it starts at the local level. A lot of the relationships, if we try to go top down, they become very challenging government to government. I mean, that's where you have our Foreign Service Officer in residence, Paul Harrison, here to sort of look at this from a bilateral standpoint. I think with the private sector, we obviously need the permissive environment to operate. And so there is a government interaction, and it has a lot to do with sort of our license to operate and tax incentives and things of that nature. But really, I think this is all going back to being local, in local communities, local government authorities, having the local community as your key stakeholders. And because, I mean, there is something to say about power to the people, when the people in the communities are really saying this is an entity that really wants to be a part of the solution of the social economic mobility, the social economic growth of the communities, that they can sometimes sort of have a way in which that they're positioning the government to be a more responsive and responsible actor in terms of their own economic development and leading the way for the private sector to come in. It's a real challenge. There are entities in our government that really do a really great job to try to, I would say, till the soil for the private sector to come in. And so there's USTDA, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, that really does feasibility studies, that gives a lot of support to the private sector to really help us figure out where to go, how to go, feasibility studies. Then I would say what was previously OPIC, which is the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is now the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, you think about political risk insurance. You know, we in the private sector need the government to be a partner as we think about making large scale or even small scale investments into emergent markets and developing countries. And so I think the way that we the global we can do more in countries that maybe have a historical reputation for being, let's just say, not necessarily being operated by rule of law or governance, that when the private sector partners with the government, the US government or the government that company is coming from, to really think about this investment as a co-investment. If we as the private sector want to go into a country, and as a US company like PepsiCo, working with the US government to sort of say, how do we come in together, private sector, public sector, and then sort of have that combination to really invest in that country. And so whether it's risk insurance, whether it's feasibility studies, whether it's really the engagement and the knowledge of the local opportunities. Again, the US government does a great job of this. Think about the Foreign Commercial Service. They literally try to help the Foreign Commercial Service and the Department of Commerce try to help business find those countries that where we really can operate and do more. There's also the local chambers of commerce in the country. So I think it's really about not going it alone. It really is using the tools of the public sector to really facilitate the private sector going in, and that really creates more of a competitive advantage and really creates a little bit of a challenge for the local governments if they do have sort of corrupt intent to really try to hold themselves accountable. And then there's things like, you know, regulatory policies, whether it's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and things of that nature, that really sort of will give us a signal: don't do business in that country. And hopefully, you know, citizens can create the will to provide the government with the signal that we want you to be, quote unquote, less corrupt, so that private sector can come in. So I don't there's no, you know, we look for silver bullets to some of these things, and really it's silver buckshot. This is about a lot of different solutions that need to come together. And so I named some government entities because I've been in government before. I can tell you the private sector is always looking for support, and I can tell you that the private sector is looking for opportunity. But it will actually run from places that don't have a permissive environment for business, and a place that doesn't have the will to really do more for, quote unquote, his or her people in that country. So I do think that it's a case by case basis. I do think it's important, and we know this, that the private sector or investors don't go it alone. Look for solutions. And I will say, from a US standpoint, that there's a lot of support. There's a lot of support. You have to find it. It's not easy to navigate, but I'm encouraged by what I hear Queen Mother talking about, what I hear Ine, I'm not gonna say your name wrong, but my sister from Nigeria talk about leveraging, whether it's Prosper Africa or Feed the Future or the different agencies. Because again, a lot of the US government investment in Africa hasn't actually really live to the potential because of lack of knowledge, because of lack of sort of understanding and the connectivity. Government is bureaucratic. I mean, you have to read the fine print, but there are opportunities, and a big company like ours really, you know, can have access to a lot of information. But I think that it's beautiful to hear smaller entities, organizations leveraging the power of the US government and all of these programs to really do more in Africa to sort of stem out corruption, but also to create more of an opportunity for economic growth for those people who need it in the various countries. So no direct answer. It's complicated, it's challenging, but there are solutions out there, and you just have to stay the course and find the right market where you want to grow and develop and create opportunities for yourselves, and most importantly for the people in Africa.
Can I jump in for just a minute on some of the things we do? Because thank you, CD. There's a lot of elements that we do there. I worked closely with Chamber of Commerce in Madagascar to push back on government corruption initiatives that were cloaked as, you know, official government actions. But one of the other things that we really do is we try to build relationships. We try to cultivate people who are going to be advocates for good governance. So we invest a lot in exchange programs. The International Visitor Leadership Program is a long-term State Department initiative to identify people. So we might want to help with corruption in Nigeria, and might identify 15 or 20 young individuals in government, in industry, who would benefit from exposure to rule of law training in the United States, or maybe how the courts work in the United States. And so we bring these people to the United States for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. They spend some time in Washington talking to policymakers, and then they travel around the United States to see how things work. I spoke to a group from Japan just yesterday that's investigating how to include underrepresented groups in Japanese agriculture, right? So they came here, they're going to St. Louis, they're going to Indianapolis, they're going to Phoenix, and they're going to spend about 3 weeks in the United States and then take that knowledge back and employ it when they get back to Japan. And these are all people on their way up in their careers. When I was in Madagascar, I ran into so many people in leadership positions in government and industry who had engaged in some kind of exchange program, either the International Visitor Leadership Program or some kind of fellowship in the United States. And so they had seen the benefits of the rule of law, the benefits of a democratic process of transparency. And they took that to heart, and they were trying their best to fight corruption, to advance interest and development in Madagascar. And they had really taken their opportunity to learn in the United States to heart and taken advantage of that. So, and that happens all around the world, right? We do a lot of that in Africa, but we do that all over the world, and those programs really are beneficial. So there's a lot of that, and that's long-term efforts. Of course, we're invested in these people, and hoping that over the next 20, 30, 40 years of their career, they'll be good advocates for good governance. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the speakers. This is such an interesting topic, and we have so many questions on the chat that we're not able to get to. Our program will end at 1:30, but I would like to just, before we can end our program, I would like just to say that thank you for all. Thank you for everyone for attending and participating in such an important event. And we look forward to more discussions and solutions to combat food security.
Violet, can you give the closing comment to Queen Mother?
Yes, I'll be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yes, again, I thank you very much. If you're not part of the BPIA member, we're gonna put the link on the chat, and also if you're interested in business and economic development team who put all of this program today, we have monthly meetings and we discuss such issues as this to bring to our audience. We're also going to have a link in our chat where you can sign up and you can join us to our next monthly meeting as well. And I'll have Queen Nina and the closing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has been a great, great session. I'm a proud BPIA member too, as well. I just wanted to say to everyone, remember that the access to healthy, nutritious food is our human right, not an option. It is our right. And let's stand on our rights and take action on enforcing our human right to have access to healthy food. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Queen Nina. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Juliana, who is our co-host to end our call today.
Yes, thank you so much, Violet. We appreciate each and every one of our speakers for enabling an informative and actionable conversation. I could close this out simply with that. Please take care and stay tuned for upcoming BPI programming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia and Violet.
Thank
Good
you,
job.
everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
We appreciate it. Talk to you, Queen, later.
Yes. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Congratulations. Oh, my ends. Sorry. Bye.